Okay, so we did 5 remakes that were better than the originals. We did 5 sequels that are better than the originals. Let's move it over to rock and roll and go for the set and do 5 cover versions that are better than the originals. Now, I want to do ones that aren't the ones that people talk about all the time. There are certain cover versions that is more or less universally accepted have transcended the original and indeed supplanted the original as the definitive version. And we all know which ones we're talking about. So I'm not going to mention All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix. I'm not going to mention Hurt by Johnny Cash. But I am going to start with one of the obvious ones. At number 5, we're going to start with Tainted Love by Soft Cell. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this one, despite it being a fairly obvious entrant into the canon, is that it does something that I'm a real fan of when cover versions do it, which is that it manages to, without actually changing the lyric, reinterpret the lyric in a way that the song tells a different story from the one it originally told. There's a more extreme example of this coming up later on in this list. Now, of course, a lot of people are still quite surprised to discover that this is a cover version, because this has very much done that thing of supplant the original to the point where now when anybody covers Tainted Love, as, say, for example, Marilyn Manson did, it tends to be this version that they're doing rather than the original Gloria Jones version. Now, if you hear the original Gloria Jones version, it's essentially a bit of a knockoff of Hit the Road Jack. Similar kind of structure, except the chords are going in the other direction. And the lyric is it's kind of the implicit lyric of Hit the Road Jack. Hit the Road Jack is told mainly, apart from the choruses, from the point of view of Jack frantically making excuses as he's being kicked out. Whereas Tainted Love is very much being sung from the point of view of the woman doing the kicking out. And obviously in Gloria Jones's version, it is a woman. It's a sort of sassy black woman telling a useless boyfriend to sling his hook. But once this has been interpreted through the prism of Mark Ullman's uniquely vulnerable vocal and Dave Ball's fantastically sleazy and seedy synth arrangement, this version, Soft Cell's version, it tells a different story. Now, to me anyway, this version of the song is patently being sung by a young gay man, probably aged about 19, and probably from somewhere outside London, like somewhere up north, and he's singing it to his ostensibly straight, married with kids, 40-something richer male lover, who is paying the rent on his shabby little bedsit-in, like, archway, where he rocks up about once a week to shag him. And this is very much this young 19-year-old man realizing that this older, ostensibly straight guy is never going to change, that he's only ever going to be his little guilty secret, and that he's had it and this arrangement can't go on any longer. It's telling a much darker and more involved and far more interesting story than the original was. At number 4, we have I'm Your Boogeyman by White Zombie. Now, there are, I think, 2 different mixes of this. There's one on White Zombie's album Super Sexy Swingin' Sounds, which is okay, but the really good one first turned up on the soundtrack to The Crow City of Angels. Now, as far as I know, the Crow City of Angels soundtrack album isn't streaming anywhere, but this version is. It's obviously turned up on some other collection, and it's a monster. What Rob Zombie does here is take a fairly cheerful disco classic by Casey and the Sunshine Band and turn it into his own personal manifesto. Everything about Rob Zombie is in this track. It starts with a sample from Halloween, which of course Rob Zombie would ultimately go on to remake. It's got layers upon layers of drum tracks. It grooves like a bastard. It's got that patent White Zombie madly processed growl vocal and possibly the single filthiest guitar sound ever committed to vinyl. It's wonderful. Number 3, we have Money Brackets That's What I Want by the Flying Lizards. This was the first version of this song I ever heard, so for a while I thought this is what this song was. I was mildly disappointed when I discovered it began life as a fairly straightforward rock and roll song. First hit single on Motown Records, fact fans. But not only is this version a gloriously weird bit of art pop nonsense, the whole thing sounds like it's played on tin cans and rubber bands, but what really makes it is that icy posh female vocal, which again, it changes the song. It turns it from just being a sort of a roguish ode to materialism to something really frostily and menacingly acquisitive. This woman wants your money and nothing else. To me, this record is the sound of Thatcher's Britain almost as much as Ghost Town by the Specials is. Number 2, and this is a bit cheeky because as far as I know, this has never been released anywhere, and I'm not even entirely sure it counts as a cover version since the guy who did the original is on it, but I love the version of Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley and the Foo Fighters. As everybody now knows, since this year's Glastonbury coverage, when Rick Astley is not doing Rick Astley stuff, he plays drums in a hard rock band called the Luddites, who mainly do AC/DC covers. And in order to tie this band in with a whole our drummer is Rick Astley thing, something he did a few years ago was come up with an arrangement of his monster hit, Never Gonna Give You Up, in the style of a grunge song. Specifically, it kind of borrows the structure of Smells Like Teen Spirit. And a few years ago now, like 6 or 7 years ago, Rick Astley and the Foo Fighters were doing the same rock festival in Japan and literally bumped into each other in the dinner queue. Whereupon Rick Astley struck up a conversation with Dave Grohl and told him, well, I don't know if you know this, but I've got that song, man, I don't never going to give you up. I come up with an arrangement of it once, it sounds a bit like Nirvana. And Dave Grohl, being Dave Grohl, went, dude, how does it go? And apparently sat the Foos down and Rick sort of taught them through the whole arrangement. And Dave goes like, we are totally doing this. And then in the middle of the Foo Fighters set, he drags Rick back out and completely unrehearsed, just based on this conversation that they've had in the catering tent, they do Never Gonna Give You Up. And what's great about it, they've done it a few times since. One of the few disappointments of this Glastonbury is they were both there, but they didn't do it. Maybe they weren't there on the same day or something. But what's great about this arrangement of the song is that it doesn't do what people sometimes do when you do a cover version of a song and move it right over into a different genre, which is kind of fuck it up for lols. What's great is they really try to make it work as a grunge song, and it totally does. Before I do my top cover version, quick dishonorable mention, The Wind Cries Mary by Jamie Cullum. This is utterly nauseating, and that's really all I want to say about it. Alright, and this will probably surprise you. My favourite cover version of all time is Wherever I Lay My Hat by Paul Young from 1983's No Parley. Now, this is a record which gets sniggered at a lot, partly because it's so 1983, partly because of Pino Palladino's warbly bass part, which has somehow become a source of ridicule, when at the time it was actually a really innovative and startling sound. But what I really love about this track is even more than Soft Cell's Tainted Love, it completely reinterprets the song. It is essentially, for all that it is technically a cover of an old Marvin Gaye song, it's basically a whole new song. Here's the thing, the old Marvin Gaye version doesn't get a lot of airplay. It's not, one of his most highly regarded songs. And if you listen to it, you can kind of see why. It's not great. It has a sort of jaunty, almost kind of proto-ska rhythm going on. And the lyric was, as I'm sure you remember from the Paul Young version, is told from the point of view of a guy who is a serial heartbreaker and can't commit to being in any relationship and dumps women as soon as they start taking things a bit seriously. In the Marvin Gaye version, this is kind of a boast. He's kind of bragging. And I'm not even entirely sure how serious it's meant to be. He's kind of presenting himself as a bit of a charming rascal. Tonally, it's like The Wanderer by Dion and the Belmonts, all right? Whereas Paul Young gets hold of it in the 80s, slows it right down, gets rid of almost everything out of the arrangement except for a few synth noodles and that aforementioned warbly bass, and completely changes the atmosphere of the song. Whereas Marvin Gaye's song was a kind of a roguish boast, Paul Young's song is a confession and also kind of a warning. Whereas Marvin appeared to be extremely pleased with his reputation as a ladies' man, Paul here seems to be a guy who's being tortured by the dread self-knowledge that he's just not a reliable guy where relationships are concerned. And you sense that he would like to be a stand-up guy. He would like to be the kind of person who could, commit to a relationship and stick to it and make someone happy and stay with them for the rest of their lives. But he just knows he isn't. He knows that however sincere he is right now, in a couple of months' time, the foot's going to start itching, the eye's going to start wandering, and the next thing he knows, he's going to be on the first train out of here. And this is eating him alive. There's a pleading tone. It's look, baby, please. Anyone but me, not me. It's not going to end well. I'm going to break your heart. And so this song takes what was previously a boast and turns it into a sort of heartrending lament. The lyrics are word for word the same as the original, the chords are the same as the original, and yet somehow this is a totally new song, and an altogether more interesting one than the one it was based on. So there you go. Those are 5 cover versions that I happen to think are better than the originals. I'm sure there's plenty that I've forgotten, so in the comments they go. See you soon.
Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please hit like and share. If you'd like to see more, please hit subscribe. And if you'd like to help me make more, please visit patreon.com/MitchBen.